In this video, we're going to be creating our very own ephemera papers that you can use in your journals, in your mixed media artwork, in your planner journal, wherever. Hi and welcome back to my channel. I'm Iris from Iris Impressions Art. In my videos, I want to help you to get creative and stay inspired. Credit for the idea for this video goes to Kaylee Gray from Get Messy Art and her amazing book, Get Messy Art. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you've got any questions or if you want to share any of your own favorite techniques, please leave a comment below and we can all get and stay inspired together. Now let's get into the video. Okay, so this is gonna be a little work along session, creating and decorating our own personal ephemera paper. So although you could start with blank paper and stain it with a paint wash or dye it with coffee, I feel like the papers that work really well for this look and technique are things like book pages, music paper, ledger paper, vintage magazines, sewing patterns, vintage photos, maps, and I'm sure you could think of even more things. But anything basically that already has some writing or printing on it, and preferably with a slightly old or vintage look, and especially papers that are matte and not shiny, will work really well. So I actually love the look of ephemera, but my problem is that I never really connect with it to put it in my art. So the strategy I found that helps with this is to do a little pre-decorating session to add some paints and other mark making to the papers. This makes all the papers feel like mine and my style, and then they fit much better into my art making process. And as an added bonus, you can also include them in your pen pal mail or send them to your friends as little fun happy mail art packages. I've selected some limited supplies here, and this is super important. I don't want this all to become a super messy, wide-ranging thing. I want all these ephemera papers to have a kind of cohesive look, and the way that I'm going to achieve that is by picking only a few art supplies. These are probably already too many, but I can't. I just more is more. I need some art supplies. So what I've done is I have selected some quite contrasty colors. So on the one hand, I have got white, and then on the other hand I have got black. So I've got white acrylic paint, I've got a black paint marker, I have got some Daniel Smith Moon Glow watercolor. This is one of the granulating colors, I think, so that will give a nice effect. I've got a indigo colored pencil, I've got a pastel kind of powder blue acrylic paint, and then I've got a fluorescent pink. So this ranges from quite light colors to really dark colors, and then a accent color. So I want to invite you to grab either similar supplies or different supplies, but whatever you do, just make sure that you are selecting a limited amount of art supplies and a limited number of colors, so that you can keep things simple and so that the looks that you're going to create on your ephemera papers are going to be cohesive. I know I just said that I just love more is more, but I will really try to have a less is more approach when it comes to decorating these papers. So we're going to have a light touch, we're going to do a little bit on each piece of paper and then move on. So what's great about a session like this is that it means that you can just do loads. You can do dozens and dozens of papers. All you need is a little bit of floor space or desk space where you can leave them to dry for every time you move on. Now, what I'm going to do also is I'm going to be working on each piece as a whole, but then when I'm finished, I might actually tear these up, and you can do that at any stage, either as part of this process of making your ephemera papers or at a later stage when you want to tear them up to be the right size to use in your journal or art or whatever it is that you are making these for. So I am going to approach this in a fairly kind of intuitive way. I don't really have an agenda as to what this needs to look like, what I want it to be like. Obviously I haven't got a very big desk, so I'm going to be using about this much space, which is about A4, so 2 A5 sheets, or here this one's much bigger, so I could work on one of those in one go. I am going to use also some of my tools like a brayer. You can use a palette knife, you can apply your paint with a brush, you can apply your paint with your fingers. Pretty much, I would say, you know, check in with yourself as to how you like to do things. I don't like finger painting, so I don't do it. But if you like finger painting, and I know that some people really do, then you should definitely do that. Because this is all about creating papers that fit in with kind of your aesthetic, your look, the things that you like doing. And now, like I said, I want to have a light touch. So instead of going in with a heat tool and drying this and keeping going with it, I'm going to just put these away and move on to the next one. I might come back to those other papers, I might not. I don't know yet. I haven't decided. But really, every time you move on to a new layer, and especially if you are using wet media and paints and things that can kind of mush together, you kind of want to make sure that you are working in dry layers. So every time you add a new layer, you want it to be dry, because if you don't and you start going on top, like for example here, I've just brayered that blue, this is all still a bit wet. If I do this, then everything is going to merge together. Now in the case of these colors, that actually works. It creates a kind of purpley color. But if you were using colors that were opposite each other on the color wheel, so let's say if I used an orange on top of the blue, then you might be creating mud, and that isn't really necessarily something that you want to do. So that's something to be aware of, and to just make sure that you move on to something so that your previous layers can dry. Now, it is completely up to you with regards to what you want to do on these papers. So for me, that means kind of scratching with the pencil, making scratchy shapes with the pen. It means brayering blobs of color, that kind of thing. But nobody stops you adding words to these papers. So you could just write some words, and when you end up tearing these up, you might just end up with a letter or something like that, same as the things that are actually already on these pages, like the music, and circle some things, make different shapes. It's all good, and it's just going to, like, it might look like a mess like this, but when you tear these pieces into little bits, it's just going to look really interesting, and you kind of just have to trust that is going to happen. Okay, I think I'm kind of done with this one. Or actually, I want to add some acrylic paint there, and I'm gonna apply this with a bristly brush and see if I can make some nice texture with that, some nice kind of dry brushing texture. That will look nice. Right, I can put this one away, and you see how these kind of papers, they're going to come together really quickly, and it will be really satisfying to just make loads and loads of these. If you've got two sides to a piece of paper, you can choose which one you prefer. I think I'm going to do this one with all the dots. That looks quite interesting. And like, even with something as simple as a tiny bit of fluorescent pink and a bit of brayered white, this already looks like an interesting piece of paper. And that is why it's so helpful to start with papers that already have like things on them, like lettering and you know, music notes, that kind of thing, because it just really adds to that interest. One of my favorite go-to techniques is to do scribble writing, and that will work really well on these types of things as well. So it's basically where you write words, or maybe it's just kind of nonsense. It doesn't even have to mean anything. And it's all illegible, and it creates this really nice texture. And it just looks interesting. It kind of reminds me of like being a kid and before being able to write, like before really knowing the alphabet, and you would pretend to write, and you'd be like writing really big letters and like writing a whole book, and it would just be scribbles, and it wasn't actually words or letters, but it just looked really kind of legit. Embrace that kind of similar feeling. So I'm gonna just pop these away so they can dry, and I'm gonna come back to those first papers that I started with, and let's see if I can just add a little bit more onto these. But like I said before, less is more. So really, the pages that you've seen me do so far were pretty much done. They're pretty much done because they are going to just become part of whatever you end up using them in. So they don't need to be fully fledged. They don't need to be finished. They can just be really simple. It's just about having some papers that already have some marks on them, that already look interesting, and it could be a jumping off point when you then start using them in your journal, so, or in your mixed media work. You can tear them up and use them as a jumping off point. And also what's interesting is, I happen to be Dutch, which is why this is Dutch book, but finding papers with foreign language on it, that can be very cool, especially if you are finding papers that have languages with lots of accents or interesting characters, or just anything that's kind of different from what your native language is. Or obviously, if you do have a piece of paper from a book that is in your native language, you can start, you know, circling words that might mean something to you. So, or mean something, or that jump out at you, and that can be really interesting too. So you can kind of take inspiration from the actual papers that you are working on. And again, whether that means something in the end, it's all good. It doesn't matter. We're just playing, creating these papers and having fun. And we're not making masterpieces, which is actually why this process can feel really satisfying, because you're just playing with your colors, your limited palette. You're not overwhelmed by all of your art supplies because you've only picked about 5 or 6 things. You're just playing. You're doing a light touch. You're doing less is more. And when you have made a few marks, you can basically say, this is done. I've succeeded. Very satisfying. That is how we get to some ephemera papers like this. And then, like I said, in order to use them, you can either leave them like this and then wait until you use them, or you can just start tearing them up. I love tearing these types of papers because you get jagged and imperfect edges, and that looks really nice, like this. Or if you prefer, you can start cutting them up with scissors so that you get straight edges. Maybe if you are creating a pack of ephemera papers and you want them to be a certain size, that's something that you can do. You can just cut them up into the size that you want, and like this. And you can see that once they're cut up and they are little different bits of paper, they look super interesting. There we go. Doesn't have to be a rectangular shape. Can be any shape. You can even like for example this one where I did that circle. Let's see if I can tear it kind of in a circular shape like that. And they become just really interesting little papers, and something like this could so easily be a jumping off point for an art journal page or mixed media piece, and that just makes me feel quite excited. Same here, like now that it is no longer a full page, having this circled word here is just like a much more interesting composition. So that's my technique if you can call it a technique, for making ephemera papers and just having a fun little creative and inspiring and playful session with your art supplies, and ending up with some stuff that is actually useful as well for future art making sessions. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you will get creative and inspired and make some of your own ephemera papers. Please feel free to tag me on Instagram if there's anything that you create that you want to share. I would love to see it. Give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. Leave me a comment if you've got any questions or any comments, or if you want to share anything about your own process. I would love to hear from you. And in the meantime, I will see you in the next video. Bye! In this video, we're going to be creating